Well, hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Keith Martin, and I'm Managing Director of the Centre for Eye Research Australia. I'm a clinician scientist, an ophthalmologist, and in addition to my role at CERA, I'm also the Ringland Anderson Professor of Ophthalmology at the University of Melbourne and a glaucoma specialist at the Royal Victoria Eye and Ear Hospital. So thanks for joining us tonight on World Clinical Trials Day for our online panel discussion. So first of all, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri and Bunwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation and the traditional owners of the lands where I am now. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to their families. So around the world, Clinical Trials Day is celebrated to raise awareness of the importance of clinical trials and research in healthcare. And at CERA, clinical trials are a critically important part of our research to develop new treatments for people with eye disease. Clinical trials are how we take our research from the lab into the real world, where it can really start to benefit patients. And our Clinical Trials Research Centre and macular research teams work with researchers around the world to test new treatments for eye disease. And that helps us to give local patients the chance to be involved in global research and also to get access to cutting-edge new treatments at the very earliest stage. And I think a great example of this is the phase 2 clinical trial for an investigational gene therapy to treat age-related macular degeneration, which has just started at CERA in partnership with colleagues at the Eye and Ear Hospital. So this is the very first time that a gene therapy for dry age-related macular degeneration has been trialed in Australia. And it's the expertise of Dr. Tom Edwards and his team at CERA and the Eye and Ear that's enabling Victorian patients to get access to this really exciting investigational new treatment. But I think another aspect of clinical trials is the positive economic impact that they have and their ability to support the local biotech industry in developing new treatments and technologies. And Melbourne has a really fantastic ecosystem of smaller companies who can tap into our local clinical trials expertise, and we can work in partnership to get development work done and clinical studies completed. And at CERA, one example of that is the work that we've done with PolyActiva, initially on a phase 1 clinical study of a new glaucoma implant that can potentially spare patients the inconvenience and difficulty of having to take eye drops every day to treat their condition. So I think that's a really exciting development. We'll touch on that in more detail over the course of the next 30 minutes. So the PolyActiva study was one of about 20 clinical studies which CERA was involved in 2020, and we're really excited to have the CEO of PolyActiva, that's Russell Tait, with us tonight. But before I go ahead with the introductions, here's a short overview video of our last year in research and clinical trials at CERA. 2020 has been a uniquely challenging year, but it has highlighted the importance of medical research and the work that CERA does. So we're really excited about continuing to develop the technologies that we're using to improve the lives of patients with vision loss and blindness. So we've really tried to keep the momentum going through this year to keep progressing our research.
Technology is transforming our research. We're seeing advances in imaging technologies which mean that we can see aspects of the eye that we've never been able to see before.
My research involves using artificial intelligence to early detect the signs of a condition known as keratoconus. I hope that my research would be able to improve the quality of life of these patients.
The research that I do is based around trying to predict who's at highest risk of progressing from the early stages of macular degeneration to the later stages, which can have a real serious effect on someone's vision and ability to see.
Finding new treatments is what we're here to do, and there have been real advances in developing new treatments for vision loss and blindness, but there are still patients that we can't treat, and that's the focus of our work. We want to slow down vision loss in those patients, and we want to restore the vision that they've lost to improve the quality of life.
My research is in glaucoma, and recently we've been investigating vitamin B3 to look at whether you can protect nerve cells and prevent their damage to prevent vision loss in glaucoma. Current treatments for glaucoma are all targeted at lowering eye pressure. However, we know that some people can still progress and lose vision despite treatment. So new therapies to help these people are always important.
Clinical trials are important because they are the most scientific way of making sure that a treatment actually works and is safe.
Well, gene therapy can be used in a whole variety of different ways in the eye. And in my work, developing new treatments for glaucoma, we use gene therapy to make the optic nerve more resistant to injury. And ideally that will preserve vision of patients and hopefully also restore vision when patients have lost it.
My research is trying to produce a tissue-engineered cornea.
We're going to use stem cells, which are created from either skin or blood cells, and use those to build corneal transplants in the laboratory. About 12 million people worldwide are waiting on a donor cornea and can't get one.
My hope for the research is that we can provide corneal donation tissue-engineered cornea to everyone in the world who needs it.
It's an amazing time to be involved in eye research because a whole range of different technologies have come together with an improvement in our understanding of how the eye works to make things that we couldn't really conceive of a few years ago now possible.
When you do research, you not only help every single person that you see in the room, you actually have the potential of improving the life or the vision of people around the world. That possibility of really making a difference to so many people is what I think drives most of us here at CERA.
So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of the breadth of things that we have going on locally and some of the things that we're doing and some of the projects that are really exciting, I think, and we hope to share with you more in the future. So for those of you who may just have joined us for our World Clinical Trials Day discussion, my name is Keith Martin and I'm Director of the Centre for Eye Research Australia and Head of Ophthalmology at the University of Melbourne. And this evening, I'm joined by two of my colleagues who have both their own unique perspectives on clinical trials. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Dr. Russell Tait, Chief Executive of PolyActiva. And PolyActiva is a Melbourne-based ophthalmic biopharmaceutical company. Russell is also the co-inventor of PolyActiva's hand-cross slow-release ocular implant technology that enables slow-release drugs to be delivered directly to the eye. And Russell has over 20 years of experience in drug delivery and pharmaceutical product development. So welcome, Russell.
Thank you, Keith.
And secondly, I'd like to introduce Associate Professor Lyndell, who's the head of the Clinical Trials Research Centre at CERA. And Lyndell's main research interests are in the clinical studies in the field of uveitis and ocular immunology, and also diabetic retinopathy. So her team runs both investigator-initiated and sponsor-initiated clinical trials, aiming to investigate these treatments for a whole variety of different eye diseases. So before we start to discuss a few different questions, just a few housekeeping issues. The first is please feel free to ask questions. We've had some questions through already, but you can ask more questions by typing them into the question box that you see at the bottom of your screens. Or if you're watching via Facebook, in the comment section on the Facebook feed, you can ask your questions there. Good, so let's get things underway. Well, I'll kick off with a question for Lyndell.
Sure.
So Lyndell, as we mentioned in the video, 2020 was a pretty tough year for research, and yet throughout that time, you and your team managed to keep a whole range of different clinical trials up and running. Can you share a bit about that experience and also how you see 2021 shaping up?
Yeah, sure. I think to say that last year was a challenging year for everybody would be an understatement. Certainly for us, probably the number one priority was safety. Safety for our patients and obviously safety for our team. And for our patients, this was twofold. As you can imagine, there was safety with regards to the COVID pandemic. We wanted to make sure that our patients stayed safe with regards to that. But the other thing also was that we wanted to make sure that those who had imminently sight-threatening disease could still come in and have their treatment safely, and so they wouldn't lose vision, because that's really the bulk of the trials that we were really trying to run. And it was important that these patients could still come in and feel confident about coming in to get their treatment. And so to do that, what we did was we reviewed all our trials, worked out which ones were really critical to maintain patient sight, and then really worked with within our teams within the institutions, the trial sponsors was critical to really make sure that it was safe for all of our patients to do so and come in. And I'm proud to say that, we were able to keep all of those critical trials running. All of our patients still came in. They still had their treatment and their vision remained, was able to be saved. So, yeah, it was a lot of teamwork, a lot of communication, but yeah, it was something that we're proud to do. And the second part of your question, this year, now that we've got all the systems and structures in place and now that restrictions are easing, we are now able to start all the trials that we put on hold last year. And I'm really looking forward to that, particularly with the new gene therapy trials that we've just kicked off this year. And I'm full of hope, I think, is probably what my view of this year is.
Thanks, Lyndell. I'll just sort of highlight what an achievement it was really to keep clinical trials going through the whole COVID period. It was really very, very unusual. Most clinical trials around the world shut down completely during that time. And I think, the way that you and your team made the case that it was actually safer for patients to remain within that close supervision system rather than being pushed back, to the public hospital system or whatever was, that's something to be really proud of. So many congratulations on that.
Thanks.
Russell, so 2020 was a big year for you guys too, and for the PolyActiva, and the successful completion of the phase 1 study was a real landmark. But we know research takes a long time, and you only just finished one landmark study, and you have to move on and think about the next, and you get the phase 2 up and running. Can you take us through a little bit of what the journey is when you're developing a new product, and how the collaborations with clinicians that support your work, how that works, and what the key things that you're thinking about as you work on this process are?
Sure, Keith. And you're right, it is a long journey from conception to when I first saw the first implant administered in the first patient was a 10-year journey. And so you do need some stamina, a bit of skill, and a lot of luck to survive that journey. Generally, the journey involves, first of all, defining the product. So very early days when we formed PolyActiva, we had a really interesting technology, but we didn't really know what to do with it. And so we needed to engage a whole bunch of clinicians to understand where the opportunities were for a technology like this. And our technology is particularly well adept to delivering drugs to the eye. Even having identified that, for each specific opportunity, we had to understand what performance characteristics were required, and the clinicians were critical to that. So our glaucoma implant, as you know, it's designed to substitute for daily drops over a 6-month period. It's designed then to disappear as rapidly as possible at the end of that 6 months. And so we need to understand from clinicians, okay, what's the regular dose that you need to release over a daily basis for that 6 months? Is 6 months the right period? Should it be longer? Should it be shorter? What are the features we've got to be aware of? Where in the eye are we going to administer it? How are we going to administer it to that eye? So all of that fed into the way we developed the product. There was then probably a 4-year period where we were building the chemistry, building the administration device, all the bits and pieces that we need to deliver the product. We had to go through another year of non-clinical testing where we assessed that the product actually worked, that it was safe, and to a standard suitable for the regulatory authorities. We had to go through what we call a CMC program. Basically, that means we had to show that the process and the chemistry and the process that we use to manufacture this product is under control and suitable for supply of a product that will be used in a clinical trial. And then we initiate the clinical trial, and that's again where the clinicians come back in. So we had to design a study to test hypotheses, to answer fundamental questions, demonstrate that the product was safe. We needed clinicians to help us with the assessments that we have to conduct in the eye to prove all that, to help us with how often those assessments should be conducted. They had to help us with identifying suitable sites, and obviously CERA was certainly the one for our first study and is also still involved in our second study. And even post having established all that, the clinicians were really important now in recruiting patients for the study. They have the relationship with patients, and they need to, be comfortable with what we're trying to do with our product and identify the patients that are suitable candidates for our study. So it's quite an important collaboration between biotech companies and clinicians in clinical trials.
That's really interesting, and I just highlight from my own point of view as a glaucoma specialist how important the development of these new therapies is for our patients. Patients hate taking drops, and a lot of them find them really difficult to use, and struggle to put them in. And so, less than half of glaucoma patients use the medications they're prescribed at all, and many of those that do use them are using them in a suboptimal way. And so the development of technologies that gets around the need for eye drops, I think, is really important, and PolyActiva is a great example of that. And CERA is certainly proud to be one of the phase 2 sites. We've been, recruitment hasn't been always easy, and that, we could talk about that another day, about some of the challenges of recruiting, particularly within the public hospital system. But I think, it's really important that we continue to encourage patients to take part in these studies, because every single new treatment that's out there has at some point gone through a clinical trial. It wouldn't be out there unless people had volunteered, in those studies. Through the life of in the development of the new therapies. Great. So thanks for that, Russ. So another question for Lyndell. So Lyndell, clearly clinical research is a real partnership, and Russ has touched on this as well. The relationship between the clinicians and the researchers, and sponsors. But it's the clinical trial sites, it's the patients, it's the sponsors that all have to come together. But what do you see as the critical ingredients for making that partnership work?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's like any sort of relationship, really, and it's really great communication, and it's communication between the clinicians and their patients to get them enthused about the trials, but also, great communication with the sponsors or the biotech company. As Russell sort of mentioned, is that, like, when you've got an idea, is to be able to bring that to trials and talk about how you want to do that, how it's going to change management, and then, design the trial and then recruit your patients. And throughout all of that, there's so much to and froing to just make sure that it all works. And it's all about great communication. The other thing also is a shared vision, I think, and that's something that has been really nice about, I think, with CERA. We all have that shared vision to try and make a difference from our patients. And that is what all of us are trying to do. And if we all will sort of work together with that common goal, with great communication, I think those are the two key ingredients for sure.
No, that's very clear, and I think you've hit the nail on the head, actually, in terms of all of these things have to come together. There's no point having a great bunch of patients if you don't have the clinicians who are interested in recruiting them, and the clinicians being enthusiastic as they like. Unless you have the ability to communicate that to the patients, you're not going to get anywhere. And so it requires good communication all around. Russell, so moving on to ask you about the sort of local environment and what you think some of the strengths that there are in Melbourne and Victoria for a company like yours wanting to develop new devices or treatments.
Sure, Keith. Actually, I think I can speak confidently to that. I think we're hard on ourselves here in Melbourne and in Victoria and Australia. We're a long way away from the rest of the world, and I think we sometimes feel a bit isolated because of that. But we really are world class in what we do. We as a company have clinical trials happening in the US, in Australia, interstate, not just Victoria. And if I look at it from the Victorian and Melbourne perspective, there's a couple of things that stand out to me compared to that broader ecosystem. One is our ability to collaborate. Melbourne academic collaboration is really strong, even compared to other states in Australia. I don't know how that's come about, but we as a business are occupied within Monash University's facilities. We collaborate quite strongly with the Centre for Eye Research Australia. We have academic collaboration all through our business. Access to world-class ophthalmologists is really important to us. We've had the privilege to work and to learn from Jonathan Crouston, your predecessor, who's now in Singapore, Nathan Kerr, who is a principal investigator in our first clinical trial, Michael Coote, who's now a principal investigator coordinating our second clinical trial, yourself, Keith, is helping us with that study. And last but not least, Penny Allen is an ophthalmologist that was involved in our second asset very early days and made a significant contribution. And they're all CERA staff, and they're all working very closely with us on the various projects. And I guess the final comment I'd make is sites for conducting the studies. And there's two areas I think are important. One is a capability to conduct the assessments that need to be conducted. Not all ophthalmology sites have the broad-ranging capabilities you need to do clinical research. And so that's important. And clearly, as you mentioned before, patient recruitment, being able to access the pool of patients that we need to be able to conduct these studies.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think I would echo the fact that Melbourne has a really great sort of ecosystem here and is very collaborative as well. You know, I came from Cambridge, and Cambridge got a lot of good things going on, but it was always said of Cambridge that you often had to go to a conference on the other side of the world to find out what the guy in the next lab was doing, you know, and there wasn't always that sort of, you know, open collaboration between different groups there. And I think that's something that really struck me about Melbourne. There is a really good culture of collaboration. And great expertise in the hospitals, you know, and certainly in terms of getting some of the gene therapy stuff up and running here, you know, it's been pushing an open door in a lot of ways because Australia is really seen as a great place to do clinical research, and you know, so I'm very optimistic, and I think we can be, you know, we should be ambitious to be world leading. We have the capability here to be world leading in a whole range of different aspects of clinical research, and yeah, I think this is going to be a place to be really over the next few years, which is very exciting.
So, Keith, can I ask you a question then? You sort of mentioned your experience in Cambridge, and I know that you've had first-hand experience there of taking a potential gene therapy from the lab to the point where it's been commercialised and it's set to start in a trial. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what we here in Melbourne can learn from that experience and what we can sort of take forward, as you say?
I'd love to tell you, Lyndell, it was all planned out from the start and mapped from the beginning, and this was the master plan of what I wanted to do with gene therapy, and that would be a complete fiction. You know, this was a huge learning experience, and it was, I think a lot of it was a gradual dawning realization that trying to get treatments into the real world in the gene therapy field, as you know, academic relying on grants was just never going to happen. It was just never going to see the light of day because the amount of investment and help that was going to be needed to do that was just greater than any grant was going to provide, or any series of grants were going to provide. And so it was the dawning realization that if this was ever going to happen in my lifetime, it was going to require partnering, and that partnering was going to require learning a whole bunch of new skills. Setting up something which could be, you know, commercialized is one way of looking at it. I like to talk about it in terms of having impact. You know, when I talk to academics, you know, commercialization is sometimes a dirty word, but commercialization is just one way of getting what you want to do out the door into the world. So it's one way of achieving impact. It's not the only way, but for certain types of project, it's the only practical way. And the field that I was working in was one of those. There was no way it was going to happen without some form of partnership and investment. And so that was a learning experience. And then, you know, having no commercial experience at all, you know, looking for partnerships that could help that. And luckily in Cambridge, the encouragement for academics to do this sort of development work was very strong. And there was quite a lot of support available. And I think that's something where, you know, we're trying to replicate that a bit at CERA on a small scale, but I hope that, you know, the bigger institutes and the universities in Melbourne will get better at that as well, because that's, you know, there's certainly plenty of room for improvement there across the patch.
Thanks.
So I guess, you know, we've talked a fair bit about the ecosystem and access to patients. And on that note, Lyndell, I think some of our audience tonight who are watching and listening might be thinking about volunteering for a clinical trial. So what are the things that they should be thinking about and considering if they might be considering getting involved?
Yeah, so I think a lot of things have changed now that we've in the the digital world. There are so many potential resources out there, and sometimes if you do a Google search, you come up with so many different things. I think to go to validated sources is always a good place, and certainly I'd actually recommend even the website at CERA is actually a good site. That it has a lot of resources and lists all the trials that are out there that we're actually looking for. There are also patient support groups and things, but also as I sort of mentioned before, it's about communication. So asking your own doctor, your own ophthalmologist to talk about those trials and, ask whether or not you might be eligible for them. And so certainly, having a look at our website, having a look at similar sort of institutes' websites to see what sort of trials are available is always a good thing, and to just keep yourself, I guess, aware or being your own advocate. I think with regards to certainly if you're a clinician and you're interested in seeing what's out there, certainly again our website lists all the trials that we are currently recruiting for and also the diseases that we're recruiting for, and there's also several links that you can actually refer to on how you can actually refer your patients in. Yep. We also have a self-registration site for patients who might be interested in any trials that you can actually just click the link and register your details there. It's all very secure as well, and so we'll always be in touch. But I think it's to really keep asking those questions of your clinicians, and clinicians to ask questions of us. Really, we're always open to inquiries.
Thanks, so I guess the key message there is go to cera.org.au and that website will guide you to information about trials that are ongoing and also allow you to sign up and register for new trials. So we've got about 3 minutes left, and we've got some questions coming in from the audience now as well. So I'll just take them in the order they've come in. So from Lauren, on average, how long does it normally take for an initial discussion about a trial to seeing the first patient starting that trial? Russ, you've touched on this already, and your hair was probably a little bit less grey when you first thought
when I started
the trial.
Yeah, look, I would say it's probably about 2 years, Keith, from when you first start planning it until you actually dose your first patient. Frankly, yep, would be my guesstimate.
And that's pretty quick, I would imagine.
Yeah.
a lot of the time it takes longer than that to get things through, sort of regulatory approval and all the rest of it. I guess it depends on the complexity of what you're doing as well.
We're lucky in Australia. The regulatory approval process here is diligent, it's timely, and it's pragmatic, and that helps. That does help.
Great. One for you, Lyndell. So what methods are used to recruit for clinical trials? And you've covered many of these points already this evening. But just, is there anything else that you haven't mentioned that you think, or which are the most important?
I think the main ones are, I think I've already mentioned them at our website. We do have Facebook. We used to also send letters to ophthalmologists and also patient advocacy groups. So we are working more with patient advocacy groups as well. But so those would be our main ways of recruitment. Yeah.
And a final question from Jen. Was there an impact from COVID-19? And if so, have the trials recovered? So big, I can see Russell taking a big sigh there as well. And Lyndell, you've had to work very hard. So Lyndell, do you want to go first?
So what we had to do was obviously halt the commencement of any new trials, including the PolyActiva trial. We worked very hard to keep all the patients that we had in active trials to continue with those. And I'm pleased to say we were able to stay open for business for those sight-threatening diseases.
And Russ, your team was pretty hard hit, and you took a big financial hit as well, and all sorts of the stresses therein.
Yeah, and similar situation to us. We suspended recruitment in our clinical trials for about 3 months, It gave us time actually to figure out how we're going to get patients in and out of the studies safely. And it went to such an extent that we engaged a personalised car service that's sanitised after every trip to take the patient from their home to the clinic, so we could guarantee the entire period they were associated with the study, they were protected. And yes, we had to manage patients that were already on study and make sure they were protected as well. Yeah. Fortunately, recruitment is back to where we'd originally targeted, which is good. And that's one of the benefits of the fact that Australia doesn't have COVID in the community at the moment. But we're acutely aware it could occur again at any time. So we do have processes to manage that now.
Fantastic. So we've used our available 30 minutes. So I'd just like to thank you for your questions and for joining us tonight. And thanks also to Lyndell and Russell for sharing their time and great expertise. So if you've just tuned in, this session has been recorded, and so you can watch it again on LinkedIn or Facebook or on the CERA website. And if you're interested in learning more about PolyActiva and the implant, you can visit polyactiva.com. And if you want to learn more about clinical trials at CERA, as I mentioned, you can sign up for clinical trials or find out more about them at cera.org.au. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks again to Lyndell and Russ, and more to follow on some of the work that we're doing from CERA in the coming weeks and months. Thanks very much for joining us.